Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Who is Albus Dumbledore, a wise old man, one of the most powerful wizards of his time, or a man with a very dark side who never hesitated to manipulate those around him to achieve his own goals? The more I reread and rewatch Harry Potter, the more convinced I become. His reputation as a kindly mentor is far from straightforward. Dumbledore made quite a few choices that seem less like those of a compassionate teacher and more like those of a cold strategist. Let's look at examples that prove this. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Prepared Harry for slaughter. When Harry in Deathly Hallows watched Snape's memories, he discovered a horrifying truth. He had been meant to die at Voldemort's hand from the very beginning. Even Snape, usually so cold, was furious at this revelation. Quote, "I have spied for you and lied for you, put myself in mortal danger for you. Everything was supposed to keep Lily Potter's son safe. Now you tell me you have been raising him like a pig for slaughter." All of Dumbledore's supposed protection of Harry was really about ensuring he survived long enough to sacrifice himself at the right moment. Yes, from a commander's point of view, it's strategy. But from the viewpoint of a kindly mentor, it's incredibly grim. Number 2. Constant lies. Throughout all those years, Dumbledore never fully revealed his plans even to his closest allies. Everyone got only part of the truth, so they wouldn't suspect where things were really headed. Watching Snape's memories, Harry realizes how carefully Dumbledore calculated his every move, every phrase carrying hidden meaning. This approach bred distrust and stripped people of real choice. For the greater good, Dumbledore systematically kept them in the dark. Number 3. Used teenagers in his plans. Despite having adult-experienced allies, Dumbledore still entrusted the most critical missions to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Tasks that determined the fate of the entire magical world, finding Horcruxes, retrieving Slughorn's memory, facing Voldemort, were handed to children. At best, this was irresponsible. At worst, it was deliberate. If the teenagers failed, the adults could always pretend that was the plan all along. Number 4. Harry and the Dursleys. To this day, people debate, why did Dumbledore choose to leave Harry with the Dursleys? Okay, let's accept Rowling's rule that the magical protection worked only while Petunia was alive. But there's a difference between placing the boy with relatives and turning a blind eye to their cruelty. Dumbledore knew perfectly well how they treated him, locking him in a cupboard, starving him, insulting and humiliating him. Why didn't he even try to ease Harry's suffering? Was it some kind of teaching method? If so, it was a pretty cruel one. Number 5. Ignored Harry. After the tragic end of the Triwizard Tournament, Harry was left alone to face a wave of lies, hatred, and pressure. The Ministry of Magic, the Daily Prophet, half the school, they all turned against him. And that's when Dumbledore pulled away. He didn't just avoid Harry, he told Ron and Hermione to keep their distance. For a whole month, no one could even properly explain what was happening. Yes, Dumbledore later admitted he did it out of fear and concern that Voldemort might exploit Harry. But wasn't there a more humane way to support a boy who had just witnessed his friend's murder? Number 6. Memory manipulation. Dumbledore knew the power of memory better than anyone. He taught Harry to dive into the pensive and see truth laid bare. But when it came to Horace Slughorn, he chose coercion over compassion. Slughorn held the key memory of Tom Riddle asking about Horcruxes. It was poisoned with guilt and shame. Dumbledore didn't comfort him. He used that guilt like a crowbar. He sent Harry, a 16-year-old, to pry it loose. "You are the one he will tell the truth to," Dumbledore said, knowing Harry's mother was Slughorn's weakness. It wasn't guidance, it was manipulation. Harry begged and pressured the old man until he broke, sobbing, "Don't think badly of me when you see it." That was the cost of Dumbledore's plan. He never tried to offer Slughorn safety from Voldemort. never offered a second chance before dragging him through old horror. He saw only the value of the memory, not the man who held it. The slug club, the flattery, the drinks. It was all a performance to make Slughorn pliable. That's who Dumbledore could be. Not the gentle grandfather with twinkling eyes, but a strategist who would dig into the tenderest wounds of a friend if it meant winning the war. He claimed it was for the greater good, but for Slughorn, it was just one more nightmare he'd never forget. Number 7. Treatment of his younger brother. Aberforth Dumbledore was the brother no one talked about. In the polished halls of Hogwarts, Albus never mentioned him. He let others think Aberforth was simple-minded, a barman with goat jokes following him like a curse. In Deathly Hallows, Aberforth spits, "He knew I'd never forgive him." That line isn't just anger, it's truth. Their sister Ariana died because of a duel between brothers. After that, Albus buried the memory under layers of charm and respectability. He let the wizarding world believe he was flawless. He never told his students or allies that he had once craved power so badly he ignored the cost. Aberforth was living proof of that failure, so Albus turned away. When Harry finally meets Aberforth, the man isn't just bitter, he's wounded. He calls Albus a liar who never cared about her as much as he cared about his plans. Aberforth kept Ariana's portrait, spoke to her, mourned her every day. Albus kept his grief silent, as if ignoring his brother's pain would make it vanish. For all his talk of love being the greatest magic, Albus never tried to heal that rift. He chose distance over apology, image over honesty. He let Aberforth carry the weight of their sister's death alone, while he built the legend of Albus Dumbledore, the Great and Good. Number 8. Indifference to Sirius Black's fate. Sirius Black spent 12 years in a stone cell, listening to Dementors drain every memory of joy. Dumbledore knew he hadn't betrayed the Potters. He knew Peter Pettigrew was alive. Still, he did nothing. He never demanded the Ministry re-examine the evidence. He never used his influence to force a trial. Sirius was left to rot because Dumbledore decided other battles mattered more. When Sirius escaped Azkaban, Dumbledore didn't rush to his defense. He didn't stand in the Great Hall and declare Sirius's innocence. Instead, he let the entire wizarding world believe the worst. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius hisses, "You've no idea how alone I was." And he was right. Even Dumbledore, who could have saved him, chose silence. It was only when Sirius became useful again, a rallying symbol, a protector for Harry, that Dumbledore bothered to act, and even then he acted in half measures. He hid Sirius in Grimmauld Place like a dangerous secret instead of demanding his exoneration. The Order of the Phoenix called him a hero, but in truth he was still a prisoner. To Dumbledore, Sirius was never just a man. He was a piece in a larger plan, a tool to be kept in the shadows until the moment arrived to move him across the board. When that moment passed, Dumbledore never looked back. Number 9. Attitude towards Slytherin students. Slytherin House always carried a stain it could never wash off. Students were branded as future Death Eaters before they learned their first spell. Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, never spoke out to defend them. He let the suspicion grow like ivy across the castle walls. When other houses whispered that Slytherins were untrustworthy, he stayed silent. His silence became permission. Draco Malfoy was just 16 when Voldemort ordered him to kill. He was terrified, trapped between a madman and his own doomed family. Dumbledore knew every detail. He watched as Draco grew thinner and more desperate. He watched as Draco lowered his wand, his hand shaking. "You are not a killer," Dumbledore told him calmly atop the astronomy tower. But why did he wait so long to say it? Why let a child drown in fear for an entire year before offering a hand? Other Slytherins fared no better. Pansy Parkinson, Blaise Zabini, even young Theodore Nott, none received guidance from the headmaster. They were left to sink into resentment, convinced the school would never see them as anything but enemies. It was easier for Dumbledore to let the house remain the convenient villain in everyone's story. Some say he believed they needed to choose their own path, but it's just as likely he didn't mind sacrificing Slytherin morale if it made the war simpler to win. If a few more students grew bitter and broken, it was a price he was willing to pay. Number 10. Questionable teaching standards. Hogwarts was called the safest place in Britain, but Dumbledore's choices for teachers often turned the school into a playground of danger. The clearest example is Gilderoy Lockhart. Everyone could see he was a fraud. His books were full of borrowed stories. His vanity shone brighter than any spell he cast. Yet Dumbledore hired him to teach defense against the dark arts, the most vital subject during Voldemort's return. When the students faced Cornish pixies running wild, Lockhart froze. He shouted, "Pesky pixie pestanomi," and then abandoned the classroom. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was reckless. Later, Lockhart tried to obliviate Ron and Harry in the Chamber of Secrets. If his wand hadn't backfired, the boys would have lost their memories forever. Dumbledore knew what Lockhart was, but he still trusted him with children's lives. And this wasn't an isolated mistake. Dumbledore allowed Quirrell to teach when he already suspected Voldemort's influence. He let Mad-Eye Moody's identity go unchecked for months, while Barty Crouch Jr. drugged the real aura and manipulated Harry into Voldemort's hands. Again and again, Dumbledore's lessons came with a cost. Perhaps he believed these were tests to make his students stronger. But real education doesn't mean watching children barely survive traps and imposters. It was a pattern. Dangerous men in trusted positions while Dumbledore observed, quietly taking notes for his greater plan. Number 11. Double standards in justice. Dumbledore liked to present himself as the last fair judge in a corrupt world. But look at how he treated Severus Snape. He didn't just forgive Snape's crimes as a Death Eater. He gave him a place of authority at Hogwarts, protected him from Azkaban, and never revealed the true scale of his past. When Harry challenged this, Dumbledore only said, "Professor Snape's word has become my bond." Those words were an unshakable shield. No one was allowed to question them. But when Igor Karkaroff stood trembling in the Wizengamot, begging for a chance to clear his name, Dumbledore's face remained closed and cold. Karkaroff had given up names, risked his life, and tried to break from Voldemort's chains. Yet Dumbledore did not lift a finger to offer him the same protection he gave Snape. Karkaroff was marked forever, treated like a traitor to all sides. Justice, it seemed, was only for those Dumbledore chose to favor. Even Sirius Black, whom Dumbledore knew to be innocent, never received the same active defense. 12 years Sirius rotted in Azkaban while Dumbledore kept silent. It was never about guilt or redemption. It was about whether you were useful to his design. Snape was essential, so he was pardoned. Karkaroff was expendable, so he was left to be hunted down. And yet everyone still believed in Dumbledore's fairness because he wore it like a cloak. But under that cloak was something more pragmatic, more dangerous, a man willing to redefine justice whenever it suited the outcome he desired. Number 12. Exploiting the Order of the Phoenix. Albus Dumbledore founded the Order of the Phoenix with the promise of unity and purpose. But behind the noble cause, he wove a web of secrets even his closest allies never fully glimpsed. Molly Weasley believed she was fighting to protect her children from Voldemort's shadow, yet Dumbledore never told her that Harry himself carried the piece of soul everyone feared. Remus Lupin, who risked everything to spy on Fenrir Greyback's followers, admitted he often had no idea what Dumbledore truly expected. In Order of the Phoenix, Sirius Black complains, "You don't seriously believe Dumbledore tells me everything, do you?" Even Kingsley Shacklebolt, a skilled aura, trusted with guarding the Muggle Prime Minister, was left in the dark about the Horcruxes. Dumbledore hoarded knowledge like a dragon guards treasure. He decided who deserved a sliver of the truth and who would serve without question. To the members of the Order, it must have felt like following a map with half the landmarks erased. They trusted him anyway because he had the air of a man too wise to be challenged. When Harry later learned the truth about the prophecy, it felt like a betrayal. He wasn't the only one. Imagine how Molly or Lupin would have reacted if they had known from the start that Dumbledore planned for Harry to walk willingly into death. Yet he told no one. He let them fight, bleed, and mourn in a war whose true shape only he could see. It was never just about caution. It was control. In the end, even when the stakes were life and death, Dumbledore chose to treat brave, loyal wizards as pieces on a chessboard. "I have been picking people to die for me," he confessed to Harry, voice quiet and tired. That sentence was not just about Harry, it was about all of them, the Order he led and the trust he consumed without ever fully returning. Number 13. Cruel Test for Snape. Albus Dumbledore, often revered as the benevolent guardian of Hogwarts, demonstrated an unsettling capacity for cold calculation when Severus Snape came to him in despair. It was October 1981 and Voldemort had just murdered Lily Potter, the only person Snape had ever loved. His grief was all-consuming, a cavernous emptiness that no redemption could ever fill. Snape, desperate to protect Lily's son, fell at the feet of the man who, more than anyone, embodied the idea of compassion. Yet Dumbledore's answer was not consolation nor forgiveness, but an agreement steeped in manipulation. In that dimly lit office, Dumbledore extracted a vow of unwavering loyalty from a man already shattered by guilt. When Snape pleaded that he had come to Dumbledore to do anything to protect Harry, Dumbledore did not soften. Instead, he fixed Snape with that cool blue gaze and determined how this grief could be used. Throughout the years that followed, Snape became the instrument of Dumbledore's intricate strategies. He was forced to inhabit a dual life, despised Death Eater to Voldemort, despised Professor to the students, and despised traitor in the eyes of most of the Order of the Phoenix. When Dolores Umbridge arrived, she spoke of Snape with derision. When Sirius Black sat at Grimmauld Place, he spat the word "snivelous," as if Snape's devotion counted for nothing, but Dumbledore never intervened to defend him. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore calmly observed, "You are a braver man by far than Igor Karkaroff," yet offered no reprieve from the daily degradation. Snape bore this hatred in silence, fueled only by the memory of Lily's sacrifice and the promise he had made. Dumbledore did nothing to ease that burden. He only tightened it. The most haunting evidence of Dumbledore's unyielding expectations appeared in the arrangement that would eventually seal both of their fates. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore, dying from the curse of Marvolo Gaunt's ring, insisted Snape be the one to kill him. It was an order presented as an act of mercy. Dumbledore claimed he wished to spare Draco Malfoy's soul from murder, but he overlooked how such a command would further shred the conscience of a man already steeped in remorse. Dumbledore made it clear that Snape would have no choice. "You must be the one to kill me, Severus," he stated, not as a suggestion, but as an inexorable directive. In that moment, Snape was not a colleague, not a man, but a tool. The cruel irony is that Snape's original crime, sharing Trelawney's prophecy, had been committed in ignorance of its consequences. He never intended Lily's death, but Dumbledore never offered absolution. Instead, he built a prison around Snape's guilt and called it duty. Even in private, Dumbledore did not lift that weight. He reminded Snape time and again of why he owed this life to Harry Potter's safety. When Snape bristled at the boy's resemblance to James, Dumbledore rebuked him with the sharp reminder, "You know how and why she died. Make sure it was not in vain." It was a lifelong sentence without parole. In Hogwarts, Snape's existence became an endless series of deceptions. Every day he returned to the dungeons, the walls stained with the bitterness of students who loathed him. No matter how many years he spent risking everything to pass intelligence to the Order, Dumbledore never gave him a public word of commendation. When others doubted Snape's allegiance, Dumbledore offered only cryptic assurances. "I trust Severus," but he never shared why. He never dared to let anyone see the small flicker of humanity that still survived under Snape's caustic exterior. That secrecy, too, was a form of punishment. Snape could never be vindicated because vindication would threaten the purity of the narrative Dumbledore needed to maintain. Even the memory Dumbledore eventually forced Snape to show Harry, his Patronus, shaped like a silver doe, was not an act of liberation, but of exposure. In the Deathly Hallows, Snape, dying on the floor of the Shrieking Shack, asked Harry to look at me, longing only to see Lily's eyes one last time. Yet it was Dumbledore who set the stage for this final confession. It was Dumbledore who determined that Snape's love could be transformed into another chess piece on the board. In revealing the truth of Snape's devotion, Dumbledore ensured that his own plans would reach their triumphant conclusion, but he also stripped Snape of the last shred of privacy he possessed. In examining these choices, it becomes clear that Dumbledore's reputation as a great humanitarian is shadowed by a darker instinct to exploit every weakness if it served the greater good. He watched Snape suffer, watched him endure the scorn of those who could never comprehend the full story, and he did not intervene. There is no moment in the books when Dumbledore offers him comfort beyond the cold affirmation that his suffering is necessary. When Snape protested that he had already done enough, "I have spied for you and lied for you, put myself in mortal danger for you," Dumbledore's response was simple: "You have done well. Not well enough to be freed, only well enough to earn another command." Many readers admire Dumbledore for his wisdom and restraint, but restraint can be indistinguishable from detachment. In the case of Severus Snape, it became something else entirely, a calculated refusal to allow him any peace. Snape's life became a monument to sacrifice without reward. He was forbidden even to claim the consolation of being forgiven. He could not lay down the burden. Dumbledore never permitted it. Even at the end, when Voldemort's snake sank its fangs into Snape's throat, Dumbledore's plan required that Snape's final thoughts would be of Lily, not of relief, not of release, but of the eternal sorrow he had been commanded to nurture. Number 14. Secrets about the Horcruxes. Albus Dumbledore carried within him a flickering ember of darkness, a shadow of manipulation that most of his admirers chose to ignore. Long before he ever spoke to Harry Potter about Horcruxes, he had already gathered more knowledge on the subject than almost any wizard alive. He had studied the fragmented soul of Tom Riddle with a fascination that bordered on obsession. Dumbledore understood the mechanics of splitting one's essence, of binding life to cursed objects, yet he concealed critical details. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, he finally admitted to Harry that he had suspected for years that Voldemort had made multiple Horcruxes, but nowhere did he offer an unambiguous list, nor did he provide a simple catalogue of what had been identified. Instead, he spoke in riddles, letting Harry stumble through partial truths. His reluctance to be forthright shaped the quest in ways that cost time, peace, and nearly the war itself. When Hermione Granger knelt in the Forest of Dean, clutching the sword of Godric Gryffindor, she had no idea it could destroy Horcruxes. Dumbledore had known this. He had possessed the sword himself after retrieving it from the Sorting Hat, and he had studied how it absorbed the basilisk venom during Harry's second year. Yet he did not record that discovery in any journal left for the trio. He chose instead to bequeath the sword indirectly through his will, fully aware that the Ministry would likely interfere. This omission forced Harry, Ron, and Hermione to endure months of fruitless searching, a journey as much defined by confusion as by courage. Even Severus Snape, acting under Dumbledore's instructions, was left to drop hints and plant illusions rather than deliver clear directives. In that same winter of desperation, the diadem of Ravenclaw lay hidden within Hogwarts itself, buried in the Room of Requirement, a place Dumbledore surely suspected. During their private lessons, he shared fragments of Tom Riddle's past, recounting how the boy once vanished into the castle's labyrinths. He sought out objects of significance, Dumbledore told Harry, his blue eyes distant, symbols of the four founders. But the old wizard refrained from explicitly naming the diadem. His voice trailed off into abstractions, and Harry, too young to catch every inference, left that meeting with more questions than answers. Even in the final year of Voldemort's reign of terror, this half-knowledge hovered over them like a miasma, delaying the inevitable confrontation with the past. Some have argued that Dumbledore was testing them, forging character through trial and uncertainty. Others whisper that he relished the role of puppet master, orchestrating the fates of children. The truth likely lives somewhere between these extremes. In Deathly Hallows, Aberforth Dumbledore scorned his brother's penchant for grand designs, remarking that Albus had always been too enchanted by the idea of the greater good. It was that same obsession that allowed him to rationalize his secrecy. To Albus, the unfolding struggle was a chess match of destiny, and he had long accepted that a few pieces would be sacrificed to win the game. When Harry revisited the pensive memories of Tom Riddle's visits to Borgin and Burke's, Dumbledore offered cryptic commentary about trophies and tokens of conquest, yet he never clarified that these trophies were more than mere spoils. They were vessels for Voldemort's soul. The distinction was monumental. Knowing the nature of a Horcrux was not the same as understanding its importance. Hermione later admitted she would have researched Horcruxes more thoroughly if she had known the scope of Voldemort's ambition. Instead, she had to piece together what Dumbledore might have told them outright, relying on scraps of folklore and guesswork. Even when she deduced that basilisk venom could destroy a Horcrux, it was not because Dumbledore had prepared them, but because she had sifted through every possibility herself. One must remember the locket of Salazar Slytherin, an object Harry, Ron, and Hermione retrieved only after months of futile searches. Dumbledore had once worn that very locket around his neck in the cave where he drank the potion. He had felt its malignant heartbeat, had guessed at its protective enchantments, and yet he did not leave a single parchment outlining where he believed it might end up. His portrait in the headmaster's office could have spoken plainly, but even then he communicated in solemn nods and unfinished sentences. The young heroes were left to decode a labyrinth of implications rather than follow a map. Dumbledore's reticence is most chilling when one recalls that he allowed Harry to believe he might survive the end. In the Deathly Hallows, Harry finally understood that Dumbledore had always known the final Horcrux lay within Harry himself. Yet in life, Dumbledore never confessed this truth. He spoke only of choices and courage, implying that Harry had options when, in reality, he had none. The concealment was not simply a protective measure, it was an act of quiet cruelty, denying Harry the clarity to prepare his heart. To carry such a burden alone was perhaps the greatest injustice of all. The darkness in Dumbledore's choices emerges most clearly when you consider the chain of suffering that his riddles caused. Ron Weasley abandoned the quest at one point, overcome by despair and the poisonous influence of the locket. Hermione wept alone in the cold, believing they had failed. Their ordeal was more than physical deprivation. It was the slow erosion of hope, a torment that clearer instructions could have mitigated. Each day they wandered England in hiding, the Horcruxes grew stronger, and Voldemort's forces closed in. Even the most generous reading of Dumbledore's omissions cannot deny that he gambled with their lives. Number 15. Deadly Traditions at Hogwarts. Albus Dumbledore's tenure as headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was marked not only by remarkable magical breakthroughs and the fostering of exceptional talent, but also by a persistent undercurrent of danger that many chose to overlook. Within those ancient castle walls, children as young as 11 were subjected to perils that would make even the bravest aurors hesitate. Dumbledore himself, a wizard renowned for his wisdom, was fully aware of every hidden corridor, every cursed chamber, and every lurking beast. Yet he permitted these hazards to remain woven into the daily life of the school, as if the very existence of Hogwarts depended on an atmosphere of thinly veiled menace. When one examines this pattern carefully, it becomes difficult to dismiss it as mere oversight. One of the most striking examples was the presence of the Forbidden Forest. "The forest is out of bounds to all students," Dumbledore announced each year, but this declaration was more ceremonial than practical. In truth, the forest was often used as a place of punishment or instruction, as if its darkness held lessons no classroom could impart. Hagrid led first years into those tangled shadows where centaurs, giant spiders, and werewolves roamed freely. The very notion that children, fresh from their ordinary muggle homes, would be sent into a forest crawling with creatures that had maimed and killed full-grown wizards is almost grotesque in its acceptance as tradition. Perhaps Dumbledore believed that survival in such a place would forge a resilience ordinary teaching could not, but to an observer it looked disturbingly like a gamble with innocent lives. When the Chamber of Secrets was opened during Harry Potter's second year, the existence of a hidden basilisk capable of petrifying and killing students should have triggered a complete evacuation. Instead, Dumbledore remained calm and enigmatic, merely suspending classes and advising caution. He knew Tom Riddle had opened the chamber before, and he surely suspected that the past was repeating itself. Yet he permitted the myth of the chamber to fester for decades, never truly investigating the secrets of the plumbing and the walls. The cries of moaning Myrtle haunted the girls' bathroom, an echo of the fact that a student had already died within those stones. The very architecture of Hogwarts was steeped in lethal secrets that Dumbledore allowed to endure. It is difficult not to see this as a calculated risk, an acceptance that some would be lost to the darkness if it meant others might become stronger in the process. The Triwizard Tournament of Harry's fourth year revealed this philosophy in even starker relief. Though Dumbledore insisted that he had been overruled by the Ministry, he still allowed a 14-year-old boy to compete in a tournament that had been banned for centuries due to the deaths it had caused. "Eternal glory, that's what awaits the student who wins the Triwizard Tournament," he declared, knowing full well that dragons, merpeople, and the maze's hidden terrors could snatch away a young life in an instant. He watched as Harry, trembling and underprepared, faced a Hungarian horntail. He permitted Cedric Diggory to enter that final task, only to emerge lifeless, Voldemort's first victim in his return. This was not an unpredictable outcome. It was a known possibility. Dumbledore, in all his power, chose to let the tradition proceed, as if the school itself demanded its tribute of fear and sacrifice. Nor was this tolerance of danger confined to special events. Hippogriffs, creatures known for their volatile temperaments, were brought into care of magical creatures classes where children were expected to bow and stroke them without the slightest hesitation. When Draco Malfoy was injured by Buckbeak, Dumbledore did not move to restrict the practice or to ensure further precautions were in place. "Hagrid has my full confidence," he told Cornelius Fudge, as if the personal growth of students required the possibility of a slashed artery. And if a child was too arrogant or too frightened to perform the ritual of respect properly, well, that was an educational experience in itself. Dumbledore's unwavering faith in these traditions betrayed a philosophy as old as the castle itself, that learning required danger and that wisdom was measured by one's ability to walk the knife's edge without falling. The annual Quidditch matches offered no reprieve from this ethos. The players soared high above the stands on broomsticks that could be easily jinxed, battered by enchanted bludgers that sometimes pursued them with lethal persistence. During Harry's first year, Professor Quirrell attempted to kill him in plain view, cursing his broom to buck and twist in mid-air. Though Hermione's intervention saved Harry from plummeting to his death, Dumbledore never took steps to ban the game or to fortify it against further sabotage. The danger of Quidditch, like everything else in Hogwarts, seemed to be an accepted cost. In a place where nearly every tradition could end in tragedy, the exhilaration of victory was forever shadowed by the spectre of disaster. Even within the supposedly safe confines of the classrooms, Dumbledore permitted the use of spells and substances that would have horrified any responsible headmaster. Potions lessons under Severus Snape involved ingredients that could maim or poison if mishandled. In Transfiguration, students were encouraged to transform living creatures, sometimes in ways that left them disfigured or in pain. The entire curriculum was built on the premise that magic was dangerous and that the only way to learn its boundaries was to trespass upon them. This may have been an honest reflection of the wizarding world, but it also revealed the cold pragmatism at the core of Dumbledore's philosophy. Better to teach a child to endure harm in youth than to let them discover its reality unprepared as adults. Number 16, choosing Harry as the Messiah. Albus Dumbledore's decisions, cloaked in the reassuring language of wisdom, revealed a darkness that many chose to ignore. From the moment Sybil Trelawney's prophecy escaped the confines of the Hog's Head, Dumbledore resolved that Harry Potter would be shaped into a weapon. He did not gather the greatest magical scholars to explore alternatives. He did not send emissaries to the distant enclaves of magical cultures seeking older, stranger forms of sorcery that might unravel the Horcrux puzzle without sacrifice. Instead, he quietly accepted that a child, barely 1 year old, would become the center of a cruel equation whose sum was death. Even when he discovered the piece of Voldemort's soul lodged in Harry's scar, he never tried to extract it through healing or experimentation. He simply waited, allowing the boy's life to advance toward its appointed ending. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore confessed to Snape, "You alone know the whole truth of what lies inside the boy." Yet he still did nothing to unburden Harry of the curse. When Harry first arrived at Hogwarts, his innocence was complete. He believed he had finally escaped the shadow of the man who murdered his parents. But Dumbledore, watching from the head table, saw only the vessel of prophecy, the living tether that would eventually lure Voldemort to his destruction. As early as the Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore began to place Harry in situations where he would face mortal peril, framing these experiences as lessons. He said it was important for Harry to be prepared, but the truth was more insidious. Each near-death encounter, Quirrell in the dungeon, the basilisk in the chamber, tested how far the boy would go when the stakes were life itself. The Philosopher's Stone was never truly in danger of being stolen by Quirrell, not when Dumbledore could have removed it from the school entirely. Instead, he left it as bait, a stage for Harry to prove he would stand in harm's way. The notion that Dumbledore was simply a benevolent mentor erodes under the weight of his omissions. Even when he learned from Creature that Regulus Black had stolen and hidden one of the Horcruxes, he never fully pursued this lead. He delayed and delayed, content to allow Harry to stumble forward in ignorance. He held back critical information until it suited him to reveal it, such as the existence of the Deathly Hallows and the fact that Harry himself was a Horcrux. This was not the strategy of a loving guardian. It was the cold calculation of a general, rationing intelligence to keep his pawn aligned with the only outcome he would accept: self-sacrifice. Dumbledore often claimed he loved Harry too much to tell him the truth. Yet when scrutinized, this claim was a mask for manipulation. In Deathly Hallows, he left Harry a cryptic trail of riddles, deliberately engineered to push him toward the Forbidden Forest. Each step on that path was meant to break Harry's illusions and strip him of resistance. By the time Harry realized the price he was expected to pay, there was no space left for rebellion. He walked forward, convinced by the web of stories Dumbledore had spun that he must die to end Voldemort's reign. It is a chilling thought that a man so revered for his compassion, allowed no true choice. If Harry had refused to sacrifice himself, what then? Would Dumbledore have stepped forward to confront Voldemort himself? Or was the old man content to gamble that Harry's decency, fostered by a lifetime of tests, would carry him to the altar of death? The question is never answered. In that silence lies the measure of Dumbledore's shadow. Throughout Harry's years at Hogwarts, Dumbledore's interest in the deeper mysteries of the soul was selective. He was aware of ancient magical practices. He corresponded with Nicholas Flamel, who had lived for centuries. He owned texts on obscure branches of alchemy and soulcraft, and yet he never launched a serious attempt to separate the fragment of Voldemort's soul from Harry without ending his life. He could have summoned the expertise of foreign wizards, perhaps the African shamans who knew the oldest rites of spiritual cleansing, or the South American curanderos who whispered of rituals that could fracture a possessing spirit without destroying the host. Instead, he watched and waited. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore revealed that he had always suspected the nature of Harry's scar. He admitted that the night Voldemort attacked Godric's Hollow, something beyond mere survival had occurred. "I think I know what happened when Voldemort tried to kill you," he said, and his eyes were weary with the burden of that knowledge. But even in that moment, he did not suggest seeking a cure. The die was cast. Harry would live only long enough to meet his destiny. The symbolism of Harry as a messiah is impossible to overlook. Dumbledore ensured that every major milestone in Harry's life carried the weight of legend. He arranged the Triwizard Tournament to allow Voldemort's return, knowing the Dark Lord would come for Harry in the graveyard. He let Harry grow up under the Dursleys' cruelty, telling himself it was a protection against Voldemort's spies, while ignoring the psychological scars it left. He cultivated the story that Harry was special, destined, chosen by fate itself. But destiny, when orchestrated by another, is not destiny at all. It is coercion, with prettier names. The irony is that Dumbledore himself once yearned for power and dominance over the wizarding world. His youthful dreams with Gellert Grindelwald were saturated with the conviction that some sacrifices were justified. After Ariana's death, he seemed to renounce those ambitions. Yet in his orchestration of Harry's life, the same old certainty reappeared. Some children, he believed, had to die for the greater good. In Deathly Hallows, he admitted as much in his own words, "I cared more for your happiness than you can possibly know. But love that expects a child's death in return is a dangerous, self-deceiving love." Specific examples from Harry's journey show how early the pattern began. In Chamber of Secrets, when Harry doubted himself and feared he might be Slytherin's heir, Dumbledore offered comforting platitudes but never shared what he knew of Horcruxes. He left the boy to struggle with the terror of being evil. When Harry faced the Dementors in Prisoner of Azkaban, Dumbledore watched him break under the memories of his parents' death. But he never confided the deeper truth. That part of Voldemort's soul was bound to him, and that these torments were not entirely his own. Each time, Dumbledore rationed the truth, drip-feeding it only when it served his long game. Perhaps the most telling detail was the resurrection stone hidden inside the golden snitch. Dumbledore enchanted it to open only when Harry was ready to die. He did not bequeath it to heal old wounds or bring peace to the living. He made it a reward for embracing death. Even the language of the clue was clear. I open at the close. It was never a gift of solace, but a final manipulation to ensure that Harry would walk forward without flinching. The narrative of Dumbledore as the benevolent grandfather is seductive because it spares us the discomfort of seeing the truth. He was a man who believed so absolutely in the righteousness of his cause that he saw no other way. His careful orchestration of Harry's life from the first day to the last was not a failure of imagination but a deliberate choice. There were always other paths, consulting the unspeakables who studied the mysteries of death, seeking the lost magics of the Druids, or pursuing ancient texts hidden in the Department of Mysteries. But these would have required acknowledging that Harry deserved the same right to life as any other child. One cannot help but wonder if Dumbledore feared that the search for alternatives would weaken his resolve. If he allowed himself to hope that Harry could be saved, perhaps he would no longer have the stomach to send him to die, and so he wrapped himself in silence and the language of inevitability. He told himself that there was no choice, because the moment you admit there is a choice, you admit responsibility for the outcome. Even in the final memories he shared with Snape, Dumbledore's tone was that of a commander, not a guardian. "You must be the one to tell Harry," he said. There was no apology, no plea for forgiveness, only the same implacable acceptance that Harry's life had been forfeit since the prophecy was spoken. In the end, Dumbledore died believing that his strategy had been the only one possible, but his certainty is precisely what makes him most tragic and most dangerous. Number 17, attitude toward House Elves. Albus Dumbledore, the towering figure in the wizarding world, the man who defied Grindelwald and later Voldemort, who was lauded as the epitome of wisdom and compassion, harbored within himself a quiet and unsettling contradiction when it came to the House Elves of Hogwarts. These small, wide-eyed creatures with trembling hands worked tirelessly in the hidden kitchens, scrubbing vast corridors, polishing trophies, and preparing feasts that appeared with a flicker of magic on the 4 house tables. For most wizards, the elves were invisible servants, their labour simply another enchanted convenience. But Dumbledore, who saw so much with penetrating clarity, certainly knew that these beings were no mere enchantment, and yet he allowed the status quo to flourish beneath his feet. It was Hermione Granger, still only 14, who first tore back the curtain on this strange injustice. She discovered the house elves toiling in the kitchens, cheerful in a way that felt suspiciously rehearsed, wearing tea towels and pillowcases, calling her Miss, and wringing their ears when they feared her disapproval. Even then, the signs were unmistakable. Dobby himself had shown what freedom could do, how liberation brought a pride and a strength that slavery never could. When Hermione formed SPW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, she did so out of a raw conviction that the Hogwarts elves deserved better than centuries of indentured servitude. Yet Dumbledore, whose office she visited with pamphlets and earnest speeches, merely smiled and assured her that the elves were content. It is striking how quickly Dumbledore dismissed her concerns. In Goblet of Fire, the text says that he smiled serenely and explained that the elves enjoyed serving and would be offended by attempts to pay them wages. This was not ignorance, nor the casual cruelty of an average wizard. It was a deliberate act of choosing comfort over justice. One must wonder what it cost him, this compromise of principle, when he so often reminded others of their moral duties. Did he ever glance across the great hall and see Winky, the disgraced elf who sobbed for days after her dismissal, and feel the cold weight of hypocrisy settle on his conscience? Consider the fact that Hogwarts itself functioned as a fortress of tradition, where the house elves were kept hidden in their underground kitchens, forbidden from sitting with students or staff. Even the kindly elf Dobby, who insisted on receiving payment for his work at Hogwarts, was regarded as eccentric by his own kind and a nuisance by many wizards. Dumbledore employed Dobby and allowed him a wage, a gesture many would call progressive. Yet he made no move to normalize this arrangement or extend it to the rest of the elves. The old argument, they don't want to be free, served as a convenient balm against the pain of truly grappling with systemic exploitation. The irony deepens when one remembers that Dumbledore had once been willing to rewrite the rules of the entire magical world. In his youth, alongside Gellert Grindelwald, he dreamed of forging a new order, for the greater good, as Grindelwald phrased it. Though he later recoiled from that vision, the part of him that yearned for revolution never quite disappeared. He was capable of imagining entire societies transformed, of breaking ancient laws to serve what he believed was right. And yet, when it came to the elves, he abandoned even the smallest revolution. He chose instead the gentler fiction that the elves preferred their chains. In Order of the Phoenix, when Hermione continues her campaign for elf rights, her classmates mostly ignore her. Even Harry, who has always trusted Dumbledore's judgment, shows only mild interest. Dumbledore himself offers no endorsement, no public acknowledgement that Hermione's concerns were valid. The headmaster's silence spoke volumes. In a castle that shaped young witches and wizards to believe in their own importance, it also taught them that some creatures existed only to serve. Dumbledore let this lesson root itself in every new generation of students. There was a moment during the second task of the Triwizard Tournament when Harry descended beneath the black water of the lake to rescue Ron and Gabrielle Delacour. Merpeople circled him, watchful and silent. That eerie, submerged world mirrored, in its way, the hidden world of the elves beneath the castle. Dumbledore knew those depths existed, yet preferred to let them remain shadowed. His famous twinkle, the light behind his spectacles, dimmed when one considered how he ignored the misery that flourished in the dark. Kreacher the house elf, whom Harry inherited from Sirius Black, served as another example of how wizarding society's disdain shaped the minds of elves. Kreacher had been warped by years of cruelty and neglect. While Sirius raged at him and the Order treated him like vermin, Dumbledore never intervened to insist that Kreacher be treated with even minimal dignity. It took Dumbledore's death and Harry's eventual compassion to redeem Kreacher, suggesting that the headmaster's inaction was not merely pragmatic, but harmful. When Hermione's efforts culminated in her placing knitted hats round the Gryffindor common room, the elves refused to clean there, interpreting the gesture as an insult. Dobby alone collected the garments, treasuring each token of freedom. One must ask why Dumbledore, who could see into people's hearts, failed to see that Dobby's gratitude was the truest expression of what the elves deserved. His inaction had consequences. Every student who walked past those hats learned to scoff at the idea that elves deserved equality. At the Battle of Hogwarts, the house elves finally emerged from the kitchens, wielding knives and cleavers, determined to defend the castle they had served for centuries. The text describes them swarming into the entrance hall, screaming and waving their weapons. It was a moment of rare defiance, their loyalty transformed into agency. Yet even in victory there was no suggestion that the house elves would be granted the freedom or respect they had earned through their courage. The status quo resumed as though nothing had changed. Dumbledore's legacy is often described as luminous, a testament to kindness and moral strength, but the elves remind us that even the greatest leaders can harbour blind spots where injustice takes root. He was a man who told Harry that it is our choices that show what we truly are, yet he himself chose again and again to maintain a system that debased creatures he claimed to value. If he had championed their cause, perhaps others would have followed. Instead, the elves remained in the shadows, their servitude unchallenged. One could argue that Dumbledore's tolerance of elf enslavement sprang from pragmatism. The castle required cleaning, meals had to be prepared, and change would have required upheaval. But to a man who dismantled centuries of tradition to fight Voldemort, who broke the statute of secrecy when it suited him, such justifications feel hollow. He did not fear controversy. He feared the discomfort of acknowledging that his world was built on exploitation. The tragedy is that Hermione, with all her youthful idealism, did more to challenge that exploitation than the venerable headmaster ever did. She was mocked for her efforts, treated as naive and meddling. Dumbledore, who encouraged students to question authority and fight for what was right, failed to stand beside her when she did exactly that. His silence became complicity, a stain on an otherwise remarkable conscience. When we look back on Dumbledore's life, it is tempting to remember only the moments of brilliance, the sacrifice, the wisdom, the power he wielded against darkness, but we should also remember the quiet, unspoken choices that left others in bondage. The house elves of Hogwarts, hidden behind the warmth of enchanted feasts, bore witness to that hypocrisy. They were the proof that even heroes can fail those who most need their help. Perhaps this was the truest shade of Dumbledore's complexity. He was neither purely good nor corrupt, but a man who sometimes chose convenience over justice. The elves were a mirror he refused to look into, a reflection of how the noblest intentions can coexist with the oldest prejudices. And so beneath the portraits and the banners, in the great school that bore his mark, the clatter of pots and pans echoed, a reminder that Dumbledore's light, for all its brilliance, did not reach every corner. Number 18. Using Dumbledore's Army. When Dolores Umbridge arrived at Hogwarts under the authority of the Ministry of Magic, she quickly transformed the school into a suffocating regime of surveillance, punishments, and fear. Students were banned from practicing defensive spells, leaving them deliberately vulnerable in the face of the growing threat of Voldemort's return. It was under these grim conditions that Harry Potter, encouraged by Hermione Granger, created Dumbledore's Army, a secret society for students to learn defensive magic. But behind the rebellious glow of this defiance, there lingered a deeper, darker truth. Albus Dumbledore himself was fully aware of the group's existence, and, rather than stopping it, he allowed children to train in secret, knowing the real enemy was approaching and they would likely need to fight. This choice was neither naive nor purely protective. It was a calculated act, shaping teenagers into soldiers, sacrificing their innocence for the sake of a larger war that Dumbledore himself could not, or would not, openly wage at Hogwarts. Dumbledore was not ignorant of the risks these students faced in organizing the DA. He was one of the most powerful wizards alive, intimately familiar with the castle's secrets and the movements of the staff. As Filch hunted students in the halls and Umbridge tried to root out rebellion, Dumbledore remained aloof, appearing kindly but distant. He surely knew that Dumbledore's army bore his name, a clear sign that this wasn't simply Harry's defiance, but a movement rooted in his own legacy of resistance. When Umbridge finally discovered the group's meeting in the Room of Requirement, she tried to expel Harry, and Dumbledore, faced with confrontation, didn't deny the group's purpose. Instead, he claimed responsibility. "I will of course have to leave Hogwarts," he said calmly, in order of the Phoenix. But he left the children behind, knowing full well they were now marked as dissidents. This is the shade of Dumbledore's darkness few dare to acknowledge. One might argue that Dumbledore's motives were noble, that he wanted to give his students the means to defend themselves in a world that refused to protect them. After all, the Ministry's refusal to acknowledge Voldemort's return left everyone vulnerable. Yet the truth is more complicated. Dumbledore didn't just allow them to practice shield charms. He let them learn stunning spells, disarming spells, patronuses, and even non-verbal incantations, all war magic. Harry, as their teacher, led the DA with an increasingly military discipline. He singled out Neville Longbottom's determination, taught Luna Lovegood to block jinxes, and pushed them to fight as a unit. "We're not just doing this for fun," Harry said, in the Room of Requirement. The line between defense and preparation for battle blurred completely under Dumbledore's silent approval. When Harry used Expelliarmus against a Death Eater in the DA meetings, it wasn't a school exercise, it was a rehearsal for real combat. The students chanted spells in tight formations, learning to move and react as a team. Hermione, who had suggested forming the DA in the first place, kept notes and rosters like an officer organizing troops. Even shy, quiet members like Hannah Abbott and Susan Bones learned to hex, jinx, and fight. Dumbledore saw all of this. He had access to the Marauder's map, heard the rumors, and read the signs. Yet he let it continue. Knowing these children would not simply pass their OWLs, they would one day face Death Eaters in earnest. And he was right. At the Battle of Hogwarts, many of these same students fought and died, proving Dumbledore's plan had worked. But was it truly right to prepare them so deliberately for war? The Room of Requirement itself seemed to respond to Dumbledore's unspoken sanction. It provided exactly what they needed: cushions for stunning practice, shelves for training materials, space to maneuver like soldiers. The castle, bound by ancient magic and by Dumbledore's authority, became complicit in forging this youth army. When the inquisitorial squad hunted the DA down, it felt like a betrayal, but Dumbledore knew it would happen eventually. He understood Umbridge's cruelty and the Ministry's resolve to crush dissent. By allowing the DA to form, he made sure that the students' opposition would be unmistakable, impossible to deny. They would be branded rebels, and there would be no going back to the safety of childhood. Consider Neville Longbottom as a stark example. He arrived at DA meetings shaking with nerves, struggling even with simple spells. But under Harry's command and Dumbledore's distant permission, Neville transformed into a fighter. He became a hero of Hogwarts, leading the resistance in the 7th book, dueling Death Eaters and carving his own path as a warrior. But this change came at the cost of his innocence. The boy who could barely perform a simple charm became someone who could kill. In Deathly Hallows, he beheaded Nagini, a deliberate, lethal act that was necessary to defeat Voldemort. But that readiness to kill was not the result of normal schooling. It was the result of training begun in the DA, a training Dumbledore let happen. Dumbledore's army was not merely a school club, it was an insurgency. It had a clear enemy in Umbridge, but its real purpose was preparing students to fight Death Eaters. Dumbledore knew this, and in many ways he counted on it. He recognized Harry's anger, Hermione's strategic mind, Ron's loyalty, Neville's buried courage, and Luna's calm defiance. He knew exactly what it would mean to let them practice battle spells. As much as he loved these children, he saw them as instruments in the war he could not fight alone. He had spent decades maneuvering against Voldemort, hoarding secrets like the prophecy and the Horcruxes. But when it came time to prepare the next generation, he did not flinch from the cost. Some might see this as a necessary cruelty. After all, Voldemort would have slaughtered them all had they remained untrained. But the moral weight remains. Dumbledore chose not to confront the Ministry openly. He chose not to protect his students by closing Hogwarts, warning families, or evacuating them. Instead, he allowed a covert rebellion to fester within the castle walls. He let Harry teach them to aim wands at human targets and shout curses with conviction. In the Room of Requirement, children laughed at first, but they learned to move with deadly precision. This was not carelessness. This was a gamble with their lives, one Dumbledore judged worth the cost. And Dumbledore's own words reveal he was fully aware of the sacrifice he demanded. In Order of the Phoenix, after Umbridge corners him, he takes the blame, saying calmly, "You seem to be labouring under the delusion that I am going to, what is the phrase, come quietly." He stages a spectacular escape, leaving the students behind to face Umbridge's rage. He saved himself from Azkaban, but he did nothing to shield them from the punishments that followed. He let them become martyrs of his resistance, knowing that their suffering would fan the flames of rebellion. He may have believed this was necessary, but it was also undeniably cold. Dumbledore often cloaked his intentions in kindness, and students adored him for it. He let them believe the DA was Harry's idea, a spontaneous burst of defiance against Umbridge. But in truth, he needed it. He needed these children to grow hard and ready to fight. Even Harry, who thought he was doing it for his friends, became a general in training. He learned to lead under Dumbledore's watchful eye, to shoulder responsibility, to accept the deaths of comrades. The DA was the crucible in which Harry's leadership was forged. Without it, Harry might have remained simply a talented boy. With it, he became the chosen one who could rally an army. This darkness within Dumbledore's plan is often overshadowed by his grandfatherly image. The man who offered lemon drops and gentle wisdom also made a choice to allow warfare to grow in the heart of a school. He turned classrooms into battlefields. He let students take on responsibilities no child should bear. Even after he died, the legacy of the DA persisted. Under the Carrow's sadistic rule, Neville turned the DA into an underground resistance, using the same lessons he learned under Harry, and by extension, under Dumbledore. The old headmaster's strategy outlived him, showing how deeply he had altered these children's fates. Ginny Weasley is another example of this transformation. She entered the DA as a fiery but untested student. She left it as one of its fiercest fighters, ready to duel Death Eaters at the Battle of the Department of Mysteries and at Hogwarts itself. The DA gave her the skills and the mentality to see killing curses hurled at friends and to respond in kind. She wasn't simply learning self-defense, she was learning to be at war. This wasn't a moral failing on her part. She did what was necessary. But Dumbledore let it happen, allowed her to become someone who would fight and bleed for his cause. Even the way the DA ended in Order of the Phoenix exposes the heart of Dumbledore's strategy. When they were betrayed by Marietta Edgecombe, it wasn't just a setback, it was a test of loyalty and secrecy. Dumbledore did not try to repair the rift between students. He didn't punish Marietta, but accepted the betrayal as inevitable. It mirrored the real world he was preparing them for, a world of spies, informants, and broken trust. The students learned a harsh lesson in resistance, one that no adult should have forced upon them. Dumbledore's army wasn't just a training ground, it was a rehearsal for a brutal future. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Dumbledore's role is that he never lied to himself about what he was doing. He did not claim he was protecting innocence, he knew he was ending it. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry demands the truth about the Elder Wand and the plan all along, Dumbledore admits his failures and manipulations with tears in his eyes. "I cared more for your happiness than knowing the truth," he confesses. But this is after years of pushing Harry to the edge. He knew from the very first DA meeting what he was asking these children to become, and he asked it anyway. Number 19, the death of Ariana, his heavy burden. Albus Dumbledore carried a shadow within him that few were willing to acknowledge. When Aberforth screamed at him at Ariana's funeral, accusing him of having killed their sister, it was no empty curse. Dumbledore admitted as much himself in the final confrontation with Harry at King's Cross. "I resented it, Harry. I was gifted. I was brilliant. I wanted to escape. I wanted to shine. I wanted glory." These words are not the confession of a man who has found peace, but of someone who knows the blood on his hands can never be washed away. The duel that killed Ariana was a direct consequence of Albus's plan to dominate the Muggle world for the greater good, a plan he forged with Gellert Grindelwald. But what did he do with this guilt? He did not become a hermit or penitent. Instead, he climbed to the pinnacle of magical society, headmaster of Hogwarts, chief warlock of the Wizengamot, the voice everyone trusted without question. He wore his guilt like a hidden chain, tucked under velvet robes and half-moon spectacles. Though he claimed to have renounced his lust for power after Ariana's death, the evidence of his career contradicts this. He retained influence in every corner of wizarding Britain. He alone determined Hogwarts's curriculum, hired and fired teachers at will, and intervened in ministry business, despite insisting he would not be Minister for Magic. This was not the life of a humble monk atoning for tragedy, but of a man who could not quite let go of the stage. He confessed his unfitness for power, yet his whole life was spent in carefully cultivated authority. His greatest fear, he said, was that he would be tempted again, but instead of withdrawing, he placed himself in a position where temptation would never truly leave him. He did not even speak of Ariana to those closest to him. Aberforth was the only one who knew the entire ugly truth, and their relationship was poisoned for decades by the silence between them. When Rita Skeeter wrote The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, the wizarding world reeled at the revelation that their hero once dreamed of subjugating muggles. Dumbledore never shared this with Harry himself, despite knowing Harry was walking toward his own sacrifice. "You were the best hope," he told Harry's shade in the dreamlike station, admitting only at the very end that he had tried to manipulate Harry into dying at the right moment. He treated Harry like a weapon, believing it was for the greater good, just as he once believed about the muggle world. When Harry read Skeeter's exposé, he was struck not merely by the scandal but by the sense of betrayal. He realized Dumbledore had always spoken in riddles, carefully guarding his secrets, presenting himself as the kindly grandfather while hiding his own lethal failings. Dumbledore could have told Harry everything about Grindelwald, the Elder Wand, and the lure of power. He could have taught Harry that the road to evil is paved with the arrogance of believing you can control it for the betterment of all. Instead, he left Harry blind to those lessons, ensuring the boy would stumble upon them only when it was almost too late. Even in death, Dumbledore maintained his role as the benevolent puppet master. The truth is that Dumbledore's remorse never stopped him from controlling people. He orchestrated Snape's every move, knowing the man was driven by guilt over Lily Potter's death. He ordered Snape to kill him in a plan meant to save Draco Malfoy's soul, but that also carefully preserved Dumbledore's image as a noble sacrifice. In The Prince's Tale, Snape rages, "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the right moment." Dumbledore does not deny it. He saw the entire war as a chessboard, and Harry, Snape, even Draco were his pieces. Such manipulations are not the acts of a man determined to atone, but of one who decided the ends justified the means, precisely the flaw that destroyed Ariana. Dumbledore himself admitted that he had been more clever than wise, but the phrase was an evasion. Clever men see their own motives more clearly than most. He knew exactly why he retained power. He convinced himself it was necessary so that no worse wizard could take control. But this rationale has been used by tyrants throughout history. Rather than trust the world to fix itself without his guidance, he believed he alone could see the path to salvation. Even Grindelwald once spoke of the greater good, and Dumbledore's difference lay only in the finesse with which he concealed it. His famous twinkle in the eye was both charm and disguise. He never truly gave Harry a choice about his destiny. He withheld the knowledge of the Horcrux inside Harry for years, all but ensuring Harry would have no time to prepare himself emotionally before learning he must die. Even when he did finally reveal it in the pensive memory he left for Snape to share, it was a last-minute, irrevocable instruction. The boy who idolized him was left to realize in the forest that he had been groomed for slaughter. This is not the work of a man who had conquered his thirst for control, but of one who had learned to justify it better. The duel that killed Ariana haunted Dumbledore not just because it was a tragedy, but because it unmasked him to himself. He saw in that moment the precise cost of his abstract theories about benevolent rule. Yet instead of devoting his life to ensuring no one would ever repeat his error, he tried to manage the error, to contain it. He founded the Order of the Phoenix, a secretive resistance answering to no one but him, replicating the same unilateral authority he once dreamed of taking with Grindelwald. He opposed Voldemort with secret plans and private armies, always keeping the ultimate strategy to himself. Even in resistance, he chose centralization of power over collective transparency. When Aberforth confronted Harry in Deathly Hallows, he voiced the unspoken critique of his brother. He called Albus a blind fool who always thought he knew best, and added that Ariana would have been happier if they had never met Grindelwald. Aberforth's bitterness was not unjust. He had lived in the ruins Albus left behind while Albus built a gilded legend atop them. Aberforth remained among the people, running a shabby pub, tending goats and caring for their sister's memory, while Albus sat in the high towers of Hogwarts, rewriting the story of his youth into cautionary half-truths. In Aberforth's eyes, at least, Albus's guilt was real, but insufficiently honest. Even Dumbledore's final plan for the Elder Wand reveals his unease with power, but also his failure to renounce it entirely. He arranged to die undefeated so the wand's mastery would end with him. But this was still a plan, still an act of control. He refused to simply abandon the wand, break it, or cast it away. He wanted to orchestrate the perfect ending to its bloody legacy, another greater good logic that assumed no one else could solve the problem without him. Even in death, he insisted on being the one to manage the danger. When Harry finally met the portrait of Dumbledore in the headmaster's office, he did not get a raw, unvarnished confession. The painting offered cryptic encouragements and warm smiles. It was only in the liminal space of King's Cross that Harry forced Dumbledore to speak the truth about Ariana. Dumbledore wept there for the first time before Harry. He confessed that the Elder Wand had tempted him even in old age. He admitted that he had been afraid to face Grindelwald after Ariana died, because it would mean admitting the depth of his failure. It was a moment of raw humanity, but it came too late to prevent the years of manipulation that had shaped Harry's life. The story of Dumbledore's guilt is thus a study in the tragedy of partial repentance. He recognized his flaw but believed he could manage it without surrendering authority. He built his legend on a foundation of secrecy, offering guidance to others while shielding them from the worst of his own truths. In doing so, he denied them the chance to learn the lesson he had paid for in blood. Harry's victory over Voldemort was no thanks to Dumbledore's plans, but in defiance of them. Harry chose to spare Draco, to accept death without killing, to reject the Elder Wand entirely. In these choices, he showed the humility Dumbledore only claimed to possess. When the wizarding world celebrated Dumbledore as the greatest headmaster Hogwarts ever had, they celebrated a curated myth. The old man with the crooked nose and the mischievous eyes was indeed kind and wise in many ways. He protected students, opposed Voldemort, championed Muggle-born rights. But these virtues lived side by side with a profound moral compromise. He was the man who condemned Harry to die without telling him, who kept secrets even from his allies, who treated the lives of friends and enemies alike as strategic variables. His brilliance made him indispensable, but it also made him dangerous in ways few recognized. Even Grindelwald understood this about Dumbledore. In their final meeting in Nurmengard, Grindelwald refused to give Voldemort the location of the Elder Wand, perhaps out of spite, or perhaps out of a shared understanding of what the wand had done to both of them. Dumbledore, after all, had been just as tempted by its promise of mastery. Their duel in 1945 was not just a battle of good and evil, but of two men who had once shared a vision of domination. Dumbledore won, but the mark it left on him never truly healed. It drove him to lifelong vigilance, but also to lifelong secrecy. The cost of Ariana's death was not paid in one night. It was paid over decades of Dumbledore refusing to unmake the structures of power he had helped build. He claimed he could be trusted because he did not want power, but the real test would have been to step away entirely. Instead, he remained the fulcrum of every major magical event of his age, ensuring nothing would move without his hand on it. He told Harry that the pursuit of power was his weakness, but he never stopped pursuing it. He only got better at justifying it. Number 20. Neglecting wand-makers like Gregorovitch and Ollivander. Albus Dumbledore was a man of immense power and learning, revered for his wisdom and his fierce resistance to Voldemort. Yet there was something cold in the way he treated the wand-makers of his age, something that whispered of ruthless calculation beneath the grandfatherly twinkle. Gregorovitch, the Eastern European wand-maker who claimed the Elder Wand, was brushed aside by Dumbledore as an irrelevance, even though he knew precisely what the wand was. Dumbledore learned that Gregorovitch had boasted of possessing it. He traced the wand's movements across Europe, reading the signs like a master strategist. But he never offered the old wand-maker any help, protection, or even courtesy. In Deathly Hallows, Voldemort simply apparated into Gregorovitch's workshop, tortured him, and killed him, pulling from his mind the image of Grindelwald stealing the Elder Wand. Dumbledore had years to anticipate such a move and intervene, but he chose not to. One could argue that Gregorovitch was simply an inconvenience to him, a witness to be watched from afar, but never saved. Garrick Ollivander's case was even starker. Ollivander was the greatest wand-maker in Britain, his knowledge unmatched, his memory astonishing. Dumbledore bought Harry's wand from him, of course, and trusted his work enough to make it central to the prophecy's resolution. Yet, as Voldemort rose again, the Order of the Phoenix never offered Ollivander any real protection. He was just a merchant to them, a vendor of tools, until the Death Eaters realized how important he was. When they kidnapped him, they imprisoned and tortured him to extract the secrets of twin cause and wand loyalty. Only then did Dumbledore's allies bother to rescue him from Malfoy Manor with Dobby's help, after Dumbledore himself was already dead. It was as though Ollivander's life had value only once it was threatened beyond repair. There is an unsettling pragmatism in this. Dumbledore knew from Half-Blood Prince that Voldemort was hunting Horcruxes, obsessing over power and legacy. He surely guessed Voldemort would pursue the Elder Wand eventually, yet he never warned the wand-makers, never gathered them into the Order, never leveraged their expertise for the fight before it was too late. One might expect a general to value his armourers and blacksmiths, yet Dumbledore seemed content to leave them scattered, vulnerable, and unaware. He saw the chessboard but not the pawns except when their position served his plan. He would have been happier than anybody to think that there was a little more love in the world, said Elphias Doge about Dumbledore in Deathly Hallows. But love without protection is a brittle promise. Consider the irony of Dumbledore's own mastery of wand lore. He had studied the Elder Wand for decades. He fought Grindelwald with it, bested him, and kept it locked away as his secret. He refused to share its history or its properties with anyone. He never told Harry about it until it was too late to stop Voldemort learning of it from Grindelwald himself. He even chose to have Snape kill him, calculating that Draco Malfoy would be spared, but also miscalculating the wand's loyalty in the process. Dumbledore prized knowledge, yet hoarded it so fiercely that others paid the price. Ollivander paid in blood and terror. Gregorovitch paid with his life. Ollivander's abduction is particularly haunting. They tortured me, the Cruciatus curse, many times, he whispers, in Deathly Hallows. He was kept in the dark, starved, left to die, and forced to help Voldemort overcome Harry's wand. Ollivander was a craftsman, not a warrior. Dumbledore knew his moral limits. He knew Ollivander would break. But he never arranged for him to be hidden, never recruited him as an advisor to the Order, never debriefed him on wand lore that might help Harry. Only after Ollivander was ruined did he become valuable enough to merit a rescue. The same rescue mission that freed Luna Lovegood was too late for Ollivander's peace of mind. He was broken, a ghost of himself. Gregorovitch was even less fortunate. He had no allies in Britain. He was just a name in a legend to Dumbledore, a clue in the Elder Wand's history. When Voldemort came for him, Dumbledore was content to let it happen. He knew Voldemort would trace the Elder Wand's line back to Gregorovitch. He might even have counted on it, since it would eventually lead Voldemort to Grindelwald in Nurmengard. Dumbledore liked to believe in the inevitability of Voldemort's downfall at Harry's hand, but this fatalism cost others their lives. Gregorovitch was murdered for secrets Dumbledore already held. It is hard not to see that as blood on Dumbledore's hands. Dumbledore's supporters would argue he could not save everyone, and of course they would be right. But he chose not to save these men, even though their specialty was essential to the war. He knew wand lore was Voldemort's weakness. Voldemort had never respected the old magics, never understood love or loyalty. The twin cores of Harry's and Voldemort's wands foiled the Dark Lord repeatedly, something Dumbledore foresaw. Yet Dumbledore did not prepare Ollivander for that inevitability. He did not harness Gregorovitch's testimony to stop Voldemort. He left them as sacrificial pieces in a game where only Harry's final move mattered. Even Harry, who admired Dumbledore deeply, realized too late how much had been hidden from him. "You gave Ron the Deluminator. You left Hermione your copy of the Tales of Beedle the Bard," Harry shouted at the portrait in Deathly Hallows. "But you didn't give me a clue." Harry felt betrayed. He had trusted Dumbledore to guide him, but Dumbledore left half the truth unspoken, counting on Harry's courage to fill in the gaps. That strategy might have worked for a teenage hero, but it left older, less resilient men like Ollivander to suffer alone. Dumbledore's decisions reveal a shade of darkness, not because he was cruel in the usual sense, but because he was so relentlessly focused on the greater good that he forgot individual good. He prized strategy over mercy, secrecy over partnership. The Order of the Phoenix was built on loyalty and trust, but Dumbledore did not extend that circle to those whose knowledge could have changed the game. In refusing to share the Elder Wand's truth or to fortify Ollivander and Gregorovitch, he chose to preserve his secrets over their lives. One might even see his attitude as a kind of arrogance. He thought he alone could handle the Elder Wand, he alone could steer the war. Even as he lay dying from the cursed ring, Dumbledore planned his own end to control the wand's fate, but he underestimated Voldemort's capacity for cruelty and intelligence. He failed to see that by ignoring the wand-makers, he was gifting Voldemort an easy path to their knowledge. Gregorovitch's murder was predictable. Ollivander's kidnapping was inevitable. Their fates were written by Voldemort, but inked by Dumbledore's inaction. And in the final reckoning, Dumbledore's plan worked. Harry won, Voldemort fell, the Elder Wand was returned to Dumbledore's tomb. Yet that victory is stained with Ollivander's haunted eyes and Gregorovitch's corpse. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry sees Ollivander after his rescue, he is struck by how frail and broken the man is. That is not the outcome of a protective alliance, but of abandonment. Dumbledore's plan saved the world, but did not save his allies. It is an unsettling trade-off, one rarely examined in the glowing portraits hung of him in Hogwarts. What makes this even darker is that Dumbledore was capable of astonishing compassion. He protected Harry with ancient blood magic. He shielded Draco Malfoy from becoming a killer. He gave Snape a second chance, yet his moral circle was oddly selective. Wandmakers were not part of it unless they proved absolutely necessary. Even then, they were not treated as friends or partners, but as resources to be exploited when needed. It is a harsh truth that does not sit easily beside the legend of the kindly headmaster. Dumbledore's failures with Gregorovitch and Ollivander are not simply tactical oversights. They reveal something about how he valued people. He loved those he understood, those whose motivations like love, guilt, or sacrifice mirrored his own. But he did not understand the craftsman's pride, the artisan's fear, the quiet terror of a man like Ollivander who could not defend himself against dark wizards. Dumbledore's war was fought in moral absolutes, yet the cost was paid in these forgotten lives. Voldemort was monstrous for seeking the Elder Wand, but Dumbledore was cold for letting others suffer in that search. There is a line in Deathly Hallows that haunts the reader. "He was trying to make you stronger," Hermione tells Harry of Dumbledore's many secrets. But did strength need to come at this price? Was it truly necessary to keep the wand makers in the dark? Could Dumbledore have built a better resistance by treating them as allies rather than liabilities? These questions linger in the margins of Rowling's text, unspoken but heavy. The grand plan worked, but it left a trail of broken men in its wake. That is Dumbledore's shade of darkness, his belief that some lives could be gambled for the sake of the whole. It is hard to deny his brilliance. No other wizard could have kept Voldemort at bay for so long or orchestrated such a fragile victory. But brilliance is not the same as goodness. Gregorovitch's murder scene, brief but chilling, is a testament to the collateral damage of Dumbledore's choices. Ollivander's torture described with unflinching detail, is not just a crime of Voldemort but a warning about the costs of neglect. These men were not soldiers. They had no place on a battlefield, yet the battlefield found them because Dumbledore refused to take them in. That is the price of strategy without compassion. That is the cost of a war led by someone who believed himself the only one wise enough to win it. Number 21, Death as a Tool. Albus Dumbledore stood as the most respected wizard of his age, yet beneath his warm eyes and gentle half-smile there lurked a colder logic that few dared to scrutinize. His philosophy of death, spoken in serene tones as if offering comfort, carried a disturbing undercurrent. He claimed that death was merely the next great adventure, a phrase that sounded poetic to impressionable ears like Harry Potter's, but in practice revealed something far more unsettling. For Dumbledore, death became a strategic instrument, a currency he spent when it suited the aims of his long campaign against Voldemort. He spoke of sacrifice with reverence, but maneuvered others onto the sacrificial altar without hesitation, confident that their ends justified the larger cause. This conviction colored every decision he made, blurring the line between noble leadership and ruthless manipulation. When James and Lily Potter were marked for death, Dumbledore was aware of the prophecy that had singled out their child as the potential vanquisher of Voldemort. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore admitted to Harry that he had known from the start the prophecy could only be fulfilled through mortal peril. "You are the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord," Sybil Trelawney's voice had echoed, sealing the Potters' doom. Yet Dumbledore never warned them in time to change the outcome in any meaningful way. They became casualties of a prophecy he revered, and when their murder finally came, he accepted it as part of the grim equation. To him, their deaths were not random tragedy, but a step along the path he had charted decades earlier. In the end, he entrusted their orphaned child to an abusive household, telling himself that the protective magic of Lily's sacrifice outweighed the cost of Harry's miserable upbringing. The same cold reasoning extended to Sirius Black. Dumbledore spoke fondly of Sirius, admired his fierce loyalty, and lamented his years in Azkaban. Yet when Sirius was framed and imprisoned, Dumbledore never deployed the full weight of his influence to secure a fair trial. He permitted Sirius to remain a pariah, knowing that the bitterness and isolation would eventually make Sirius reckless. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Sirius's restlessness culminated in his death during the battle at the Department of Mysteries. Dumbledore later admitted to Harry, "I should have made you see, Sirius was not your father." But even this confession skirted the deeper truth. Sirius was another pawn whose loss Dumbledore considered tolerable if it kept the greater plan in motion. Perhaps nowhere is Dumbledore's instrumental view of death more apparent than in his treatment of Severus Snape. When Dumbledore was cursed by the ring Horcrux, he methodically planned his own demise, but in a way that conscripted Snape into complicity. He insisted that Snape be the one to kill him, explaining it would spare Draco Malfoy's soul and secure Voldemort's trust. The arrangement was coldly precise. As Dumbledore told Snape in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, "It is essential that you kill me, you." To do it, he orchestrated his death like a chess move, sparing himself the indignity of decay and preserving Snape's cover at the cost of moral ruin. Even his own life became a transaction to be settled at the appointed hour. Harry himself was perhaps the ultimate example of this unsettling philosophy. From the moment Dumbledore learned of the prophecy, he foresaw that Harry would one day have to die for Voldemort's defeat to be complete. Yet he withheld this truth until the final hours of the war. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Harry relives Dumbledore's admission in the pensive, "You were the seventh Horcrux." All those years of mentorship and affection were shadowed by the knowledge that Dumbledore saw Harry's death as an inevitable sacrifice. The gentle old man who offered lemon drops and reassurances had been quietly preparing Harry for slaughter. Dumbledore told Snape. "You must be the one to tell Harry." And in that moment, the depth of his strategic calculation was laid bare. He had groomed Harry not merely as a student, but as a weapon that would one day extinguish Voldemort at the price of its own destruction. It is easy to romanticize Dumbledore's choices as the burden of leadership, to admire his willingness to shoulder guilt so others would not. But the pattern is too consistent to ignore. Time and again, he measured the worth of a life against the tactical advantage it could yield. He respected death when it arrived on schedule, when it advanced the narrative he had crafted in his mind, his platitudes about death as an adventure obscured. How little he valued the right of others to choose their own fates. He was, in the end, a man so convinced of his moral vision that he believed himself entitled to steer the destinies of others without their consent. Even in his youth, Dumbledore's relationship with power and death had dangerous edges. His friendship with Gellert Grindelwald, as recounted in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, was founded on dreams of a new world order that would rationalize any sacrifice. Ariana Dumbledore's accidental death marked the first time Albus saw what his ambitions could cost. Yet while he never again sought dominance, he never fully relinquished the conviction that he knew best how lives should be spent. The burden of guilt he carried did not keep him from continuing to gamble with other people's mortality. Some will argue that the defeat of Voldemort required such sacrifice. Indeed, Voldemort's own disregard for life demanded a fierce response, but Dumbledore's readiness to let others die was not always forced upon him by circumstance. It was, at least partly, the expression of a deep-seated belief that destiny was more important than individual suffering. His faith in prophecy became a rationale for accepting, and even facilitating, death. He did not see himself as cruel, only as pragmatic. But to those who loved the people he deemed expendable, his pragmatism looked eerily like betrayal. When Dumbledore stood before Harry in King's Cross after Harry's sacrifice, he finally spoke the words he had kept hidden for so long. He admitted he had cared too much for Harry to tell him the truth earlier, but caring did not absolve the fact that he had quietly primed Harry for death while pretending to offer him protection. It is this dissonance between Dumbledore's affectionate demeanour and the ruthless calculus beneath that gives his character its unsettling gravity. He was, in his own way, a benevolent general who could look a young man in the eyes, call him beloved, and still see his death as an acceptable outcome. Even the language Dumbledore used carried a curious detachment. He never spoke of murder or sacrifice in plain terms. Instead, he framed death in metaphors, an adventure, a necessity, a release. When he told Harry that, to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure, he cloaked a terrifying reality in comforting words. Those words sound wise until one remembers that he never applied them to his own existence until he had controlled every aspect of how and when he would die. Others did not receive the luxury of such control. Their ends came as part of Dumbledore's design. In this light, Dumbledore emerges as a man of contradictions. He was wise yet blind to his own arrogance. He was kind yet capable of a chilling indifference. He was a mentor whose love for his students could not override his conviction that their deaths might be necessary. His reputation as the greatest headmaster of Hogwarts is well earned, but it is built on a foundation of choices that, once examined, are neither wholly noble nor entirely innocent. His legacy is a testament to the seductive power of ends justify means thinking. For all his goodness, and he was good in many ways, Dumbledore never entirely escaped the shadow of his youthful conviction that he alone knew the shape the world must take. His philosophy of death was not merely about accepting mortality. It was about wielding it as a tool, as a form of leverage, and in doing so, he blurred the moral lines so thoroughly that even those closest to him never fully understood the price they were paying until it was too late. Number 22, Indifference to Muggle Lives. Albus Dumbledore's name echoed through the halls of Hogwarts like an incantation meant to inspire reverence. He was revered as the greatest wizard of his age, the wise champion who stood between Voldemort and the utter ruin of the wizarding world. Yet, behind the half-moon spectacles and twinkling blue eyes, there lingered a shade of darkness seldom acknowledged by those who worshipped his legend. For all the countless accolades heaped upon him as a defender of muggles, the historical record betrays a disquieting reality. Dumbledore, in truth, demonstrated a curious indifference to the suffering of non-magical people. The wizarding war that Voldemort unleashed was not confined to the hidden alleys of Diagon Alley or the bloodied corridors of the Department of Mysteries. It spilled across the quiet lanes of Muggle villages and tore through the lives of families who had never even heard the name Gellert Grindelwald. And yet, Dumbledore's focus remained obstinately fixed on the struggle within the walls of magical Britain, as though the fate of ordinary humans was a regrettable footnote to his grand designs. It was no secret that Voldemort's Death Eaters considered Muggle deaths a mere demonstration of power, a performance to broadcast their supremacy. The Daily Prophet eventually acknowledged these atrocities only after relentless pressure from the Muggle-born community, but even then Dumbledore's response was tepid. The most chilling example remains the night when the Rookwood family, non-magical farmers living near Derbyshire, were massacred in their sleep, their deaths claimed as collateral damage in the war against the Order of the Phoenix. While the Ministry floundered to conceal the truth from Muggle authorities, Dumbledore did not intervene to coordinate any rescue or provide the bereaved with even the decency of an explanation. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when the Prime Minister of Britain confronted Cornelius Fudge over the unexplained deaths and bridge collapses, Fudge merely shrugged and assured him the wizarding world had the matter in hand. But Dumbledore himself never bothered to appear before the Prime Minister, never deigned to explain why families were slaughtered for a war they could not even see. The same disquieting pattern surfaced in Dumbledore's handling of the mass Muggle murders that Voldemort staged during his first rise to power. Take the case of the Bones family, whose Muggle neighbours were murdered alongside them, presumably for no greater crime than proximity. This horror was not unknown to Dumbledore. Indeed, he even referenced it in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, stating with pained solemnity that many families have suffered. Yet what steps did he actually take to prevent further slaughter? The historical accounts show that Dumbledore busied himself forming the Order of the Phoenix to oppose Voldemort's conquest of wizarding institutions, but no organized defense was ever extended to Muggle communities. The Order's watchful eyes guarded magical families, magical safe houses and magical artifacts, but the towns of ordinary Britons lay open and unprotected. A more cynical observer might suggest Dumbledore believed it was not the duty of wizards to intervene. Yet this interpretation conflicts with his public proclamations. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, he told Minerva McGonagall that it would be enough to turn any boy's head to learn he was famous in a world he could not even imagine. Dumbledore always insisted that Muggles deserved dignity and protection. But when the threat became real, his theoretical compassion dissolved into an almost aristocratic detachment. The countless lives destroyed by Death Eaters, ordinary shopkeepers, children in their beds, elderly couples, in the countryside were mourned in private, but never merited any sustained defensive effort. Nor did Dumbledore ever see fit to share critical intelligence with Muggle authorities who might have been able to act. His knowledge of Horcruxes and Voldemort's magical ambitions was guarded with the zeal of a medieval priest safeguarding relics. He withheld information from the Muggle Prime Minister, who was reduced to vague dread and helplessness as bridges collapsed and storms battered the coasts. "The trouble is, the other side can do magic too," Fudge explained apologetically in Half-Blood Prince. This was the nearest the Muggle government ever came to the truth. Dumbledore never stepped through the Prime Minister's door to say, Here is the enemy. Here is what he wants. Here is what you must do to protect your people. In the years when Voldemort vanished after his failed attack on the Potters, Dumbledore had the opportunity to rebuild relations between the magical and non-magical worlds. He could have established channels of cooperation to prevent any repetition of Grindelwald's reign of terror or Voldemort's slaughter. Instead, he retreated into Hogwarts, watching from the ramparts while Muggles remained ignorant and vulnerable. The wizarding community cloaked itself in the convenient fiction that the threat had vanished forever, while Dumbledore quietly prepared for the day when Harry Potter would come of age. The welfare of Muggles was not a priority worthy of his time. One can scarcely imagine the fear and confusion that plagued the Muggle victims of Death Eater terror. The Roberts family, attacked during the Quidditch World Cup, was left permanently traumatized, their memories altered, their bodies battered. The incident was treated as an embarrassing breach of secrecy rather than a humanitarian catastrophe. Even then, Dumbledore's energies were consumed by the Triwizard Tournament, and he offered no public words of comfort or apology to the Roberts family. He accepted no responsibility for the consequences of a society so determined to keep itself hidden that it refused to protect the innocents living beside it. Critics sometimes argue that Dumbledore's hands were tied by the statute of secrecy, that he could not risk exposure of the wizarding world. But in times of existential threat, the statute was already breached repeatedly by Death Eaters. Dark marks burned in the sky over Muggle towns. Entire families vanished without trace. Dumbledore could have authorized a temporary suspension of secrecy to permit genuine collaboration with Muggle law enforcement. He never did. Instead, he remained content to watch the destruction unfold, a spectator to the suffering of those he claimed to champion. His preoccupation with the defeat of Voldemort became an obsession so consuming that all other concerns receded. Dumbledore's meticulous orchestration of Harry's childhood, the secrecy surrounding the prophecy, and his relentless pursuit of Horcruxes all reveal a man who saw the world through a singular lens, the triumph over Tom Riddle. In the process, he lost any perspective on the countless Muggles who were nothing more than statistics in the war's grim ledger. When he finally confided the prophecy to Harry in Order of the Phoenix, he admitted that he had allowed himself to care for the boy, fearing it would weaken his resolve. Yet he did not express similar regret for his indifference to the anonymous families whose lives were crushed by the conflict. Even in death, Dumbledore remained a symbol of benevolence. His portrait was hung in the headmaster's office as though the weight of his failures could be forgiven by the mere force of legend. The students and teachers gathered to mourn the passing of a great man, never daring to consider the possibility that greatness was accompanied by blindness. It is worth asking if he had diverted even a fraction of his resources and ingenuity toward protecting Muggles, how many lives could have been saved? How many families might have been spared the cold comfort of a ministry-issued obituary? Dumbledore's refusal to act also speaks to the insularity of the wizarding community itself. For centuries, wizards had convinced themselves that their concealment was a benevolent necessity, that Muggles were too fragile to learn the truth. In reality, this isolation bred an indifference that left non-magical people expendable. Dumbledore, who prided himself on tolerance, never challenged this cultural arrogance. He spoke the language of equality but practiced a policy of convenient neglect. One cannot deny his courage in opposing Grindelwald or defeating Voldemort, yet it is precisely because he possessed such formidable power that his indifference becomes more troubling. He had the authority to change the wizarding world's relationship with Muggles, to confront the entrenched elitism that allowed such atrocities to unfold unchecked. Instead, he chose to preserve the old order, to protect the illusions of secrecy and superiority, even as innocent lives were lost in the shadows. This is the uncomfortable truth behind the twinkle in Dumbledore's eye. He was a man who believed he alone held the wisdom to decide whose suffering deserved attention. When the final history of Voldemort's terror is written, it must include the countless muggles who died not only because a monster rose to power, but because the one man capable of protecting them did not consider it worth the effort. In the end, Albus Dumbledore's legacy is a tapestry woven of brilliance and neglect, courage and apathy, a testament to the peril of believing that noble intentions excuse a failure to act. Number 23, hiding the truth about Harry's father. Albus Dumbledore's silence was never accidental. When Harry Potter arrived at Hogwarts orphaned and lost, Dumbledore quickly became the closest thing to a guiding star. But behind the twinkling eyes and kindly manner was a man who understood the power of stories and the cost of truth. Dumbledore chose not to tell Harry the whole story of James Potter. He let Harry cherish the image of a perfect father, knowing full well that the boy's vision of James was built on myths, half-truths, and the memories of loyal friends like Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, who would never speak ill of the dead. When Harry stumbled on the truth in Snape's worst memory, it was an ugly revelation. James, at 15, cackling with Sirius as they hexed Severus Snape upside down, bearing his underwear in front of a crowd. It was humiliating, brutal, and Dumbledore had known it all along. The headmaster had watched the pensive memory in the bowels of his office, seen the sneering boy his prized pupil's father once was. Yet he never prepared Harry for it. Instead, he allowed Harry to think of James as noble and good, a hero cut down in his prime, which, while partly true, wasn't the whole of it. Dumbledore's reasons were layered with moral ambiguity. Harry was raised unloved, starving for affection and validation. By offering him an untarnished hero to emulate, Dumbledore provided emotional scaffolding. But that scaffolding was built on selective silence, on careful manipulation of narrative. There is an unsettling brilliance in how Dumbledore handled Harry. He knew Harry was Voldemort's target precisely because of a prophecy that turned the boy into a weapon. Neither can live while the other survives. To keep Harry willing to fight to the death, he had to nurture the boy's conviction that his parents had died for something pure, something worth defending. A James Potter who was cruel to a bullied classmate who delighted in Snape's terror and humiliation would have complicated that tidy myth. Dumbledore, ever the strategist, chose the cleaner story, the one that would keep Harry's loyalty unwavering, his hatred of Voldemort absolute. Consider the moment in Order of the Phoenix when Harry sees that memory in Snape's pensive. He is shattered. Rowling writes, Harry felt as though he had just learned that his father had been a Death Eater. The analogy is telling. For Harry, that revelation isn't a mere teenage prank exposed, it's a betrayal of everything he believed in. James was supposed to be the embodiment of the good wizard, the antithesis of Voldemort. Dumbledore could have softened that blow by telling Harry earlier, guiding him toward forgiveness, complexity, nuance. He did not. Instead, Dumbledore left Harry to discover it in the most violent, humiliating way possible via the angry revenge of Severus Snape. The result was a fracture in Harry's trust, not just in Snape, but in his own sense of self. For Harry always feared he was like his father in temperament. Indeed, in Order of the Phoenix, after nearly attacking Bellatrix in a rage, he wonders if there is something wrong with him. Dumbledore knew Harry was not a perfect boy. He was impulsive, reckless, fiercely loyal. These were James's traits as well, but Dumbledore let Harry believe James had outgrown all of them before dying. Why would he do this? Because Dumbledore needed Harry to want to be like James. It was easier for Harry to accept his role in the coming war if he felt he was following his parents' example. The cult of James Potter was useful propaganda. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore finally begins to peel back the layers of truth, admitting to Harry that he's been grooming him for death. "I cared about you too much," he says, with painful honesty. But even then, he does not revisit the question of James's moral failings. He does not offer Harry a mature conversation about forgiveness, regret, or the complexity of adulthood. Snape, ironically, becomes the one to force Harry to confront the truth about James's cruelty. In Deathly Hallows, Harry carries Snape's memories to the Pensieve and watches Snape call Lily a mudblood, then watches James hex him for no reason. Rowling writes, "It was as though a film in his head had been scratched, a vision of James the hero had cracked and warped." But Dumbledore had let that vision stay intact for years because it kept Harry docile, believing in the moral clarity of his mission. The manipulative side of Dumbledore is even clearer if we consider his private view of the world. He tells Harry in King's Cross, "Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." Yet he pitied Harry so much that he chose to lie by omission, to spare him the pain of his father's flaws, so that he could push Harry to sacrifice himself for the cause. This is not the act of a purely benevolent mentor. It is the strategy of someone willing to use others for the greater good. Dumbledore was in many ways the architect of Harry's emotional landscape. By refusing to let anyone challenge the myth of James Potter, he kept Harry's hatred for Voldemort sharp. Harry says in Order of the Phoenix, "He killed my parents." That rage is what Dumbledore needed. It is a chilling calculation. Harry was easier to control when he had no reason to doubt his side's essential goodness. Consider also Sirius Black, who idolized James and enabled the lie. But Sirius was frozen in adolescence, clinging to the memory of their friendship as the best days of his life. Dumbledore could have challenged Sirius to be a better guardian, to prepare Harry for moral ambiguity, but he did not. He let Sirius feed Harry that uncritical loyalty. For all his wisdom, Dumbledore refused to create space for Harry to think critically about the previous generation's failures. This choice is even more striking given Dumbledore's own past. He was a boy who fell for Grindelwald's ideology, who dreamed of wizard domination, who learned the cost of his hubris when Ariana died. He, more than anyone, knew the danger of charismatic young men convinced they are in the right. Yet he kept Harry blind to James's cruelty, even though it mirrored the very arrogance he had once feared in himself. Dumbledore's defenders might argue he wanted to protect Harry's innocence, but Harry was never truly innocent. He faced death at 11, killed a basilisk at 12, watched Cedric die at 14. The idea that Harry could not handle knowing his father was flawed seems disingenuous. More likely, Dumbledore feared that knowledge would corrode Harry's willingness to die for others. He did not want to risk Harry asking whether the side of the light was as pure as it claimed. Rowling does not absolve Dumbledore of this. She writes him as a man who carries guilt, who tells Harry in the cave, "I am not worried, Harry. I am with you." But it is a line laced with manipulation. He wanted Harry's loyalty to the end, even as he sent him toward death. It is part of the tragedy of Dumbledore that he believed so firmly in the greater good that he forgot the cost of that belief on individual lives. Harry, for his part, ultimately learns to forgive his father's flaws. In Deathly Hallows, he tells his son, Albus Severus, "You were named after 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin, and he was probably the bravest man I ever knew." There is no similar condemnation of James. Harry chooses to keep the myth alive, in part because he understands the comfort it brings, but it is a choice Dumbledore made for him first, before he was old enough to decide for himself. Albus Dumbledore was not evil, but he was a master of narratives. He knew the boy who lived under the stairs needed a father figure, even if that father figure had to be resurrected in legend alone. He gave Harry the gift of a father who died for love, unblemished by cruelty or arrogance. And in doing so, he denied Harry the harder but more honest path of understanding that people are rarely purely good or evil. Dumbledore's silence on James's bullying was not neutral. It was an active choice that shaped Harry's understanding of his own nature. It made Harry fear that he too could become cruel without realizing it. It kept Harry's hatred focused outward on Voldemort rather than inward, questioning the contradictions of his side. In a war for hearts and minds, Dumbledore fought like a general, and Harry was both his weapon and his legacy. This is the shade of darkness in Albus Dumbledore, the willingness to sacrifice truth for hope, to trade honesty for loyalty, to build the savior he needed even at the cost of the boy's peace of mind. He may have loved Harry, but he loved the victory more. In the end, Dumbledore left Harry with his father's wand, his cloak, his name, and the burden of living up to an impossible ideal. Number 24. Silent approval of school violence. Albus Dumbledore presided over Hogwarts with an air of benign wisdom, but beneath that twinkle in his eyes lay an unsettling truth. He watched violence flourish among children and did shockingly little to stop it. Year after year, the school seethed with house rivalries that frequently tipped into cruelty. Gryffindors mocked Slytherins in the corridors, hexing them behind statues, and Slytherins retaliated in kind. Dumbledore might have had a vast understanding of human nature, but he allowed these grudges to define student life. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, after Draco Malfoy calls Hermione a mudblood in later books, there's no systemic punishment for slur usage, no anti-bullying initiative, just a shrugging acceptance that insults were part of the game. He offered no real guidance on curbing bigotry despite seeing its consequences in the First Wizarding War. He let dueling clubs form without proper oversight, as in Chamber of Secrets, where Lockhart's laughably incompetent lessons gave Malfoy the opportunity to try to sick a serpent on Harry. Though the event exposed Harry's Parseltongue ability, which deepened suspicion of him, Dumbledore seemed content to let Lockhart teach without serious review of his curriculum. It was Dumbledore's job to ensure that defense against the dark arts was taught safely and competently, but he treated the chaos like an experiment, as if the children's humiliations and terrors were data points for his own amusement or curiosity. A true headmaster would have intervened, placing student safety over the whole charlatan's ego. He was notorious for his tolerance of pranking culture that often veered into cruelty. Fred and George Weasley's boisterous rule-breaking was often framed as harmless fun, but they sold dangerous joke products and once forced Montague into a vanishing cabinet, nearly killing him. Dumbledore knew what they were capable of. He even winked at their antics, tolerating their fireworks during Order of the Phoenix as a form of protest against Umbridge. Yet he never seriously cracked down on students using fear or physical harm for laughs. Discipline at Hogwarts was either sadistically harsh under professors like Snape or Umbridge, or absurdly lax under Dumbledore's watch, with no meaningful middle ground. He also enabled a teaching environment that was fundamentally hostile. Severus Snape, one of Dumbledore's most trusted allies, openly bullied Neville Longbottom, once describing cutting out Neville's toad's eyes in front of the class. He called Hermione an insufferable know-it-all in Prisoner of Azkaban. Dumbledore was aware of these humiliations. He wasn't blind or ignorant. He was omniscient in his own school. Yet he never intervened. He let Snape brutalize children because he valued Snape's loyalty and skill over the well-being of his students. This choice spoke volumes about his priorities. Victory in the larger war justified any personal cost. Dumbledore's claim to allow students to make choices and grow from mistakes sounds noble, but it crumbles under scrutiny when these choices endanger others. He let Draco Malfoy roam the castle in Half-Blood Prince, plotting Dumbledore's own assassination and repairing the vanishing cabinet that led Death Eaters into the school. Dumbledore, ever the puppet master, claimed he wanted to give Draco a chance to choose redemption. But what of the other students? Did they deserve to be terrorized by Death Eaters because Dumbledore was running a moral experiment on a 16-year-old? The consequences of his benevolent neglect were nearly fatal for the entire school. He also downplayed and overlooked outright torture. When Dolores Umbridge forced Harry to carve "I must not tell lies" into his own hand in Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore knew it was happening. Harry admitted in the Order of the Phoenix that he tried to tell McGonagall, who was horrified. But Dumbledore remained aloof, citing his need to distance himself to protect Harry from Voldemort's mental connection. Even if this had some merit, there were no behind-the-scenes efforts to stop Umbridge's reign of terror. He left his students to fend for themselves, enduring physical abuse in his absence. This freedom he granted them was selective. He made Harry bear the prophecy's burden alone, telling him he was the chosen one, destined to kill Voldemort. He offered no counseling services, no plan for protecting Harry's mental health, as he faced repeated trauma bereavement and the burden of murder. "I cared about you too much," he said in Half-Blood Prince, after admitting he'd withheld the full truth for years. It was a confession drenched in self-justification, offering no comfort to a boy who'd been manipulated since childhood. Dumbledore's affection was real, but it never stopped him from using Harry as a weapon. He turned a blind eye to the hazing culture of Hogwarts houses. Slytherin was treated as a hive of villains, but he never tried to reform the house or break down the toxic stereotypes. Even the Sorting Hat pleaded for unity in Order of the Phoenix, singing "We must unite inside her walls, or we'll crumble from within." Dumbledore listened but did nothing to act on this warning. He allowed the house system to fester with resentments that Voldemort could, and did, exploit. Instead of guiding Slytherins toward better choices, he let them sink further into isolation and suspicion. He tolerated Peeves, the poltergeist who regularly traumatized first years and made the castle dangerous. While amusing to some, Peeves dropped heavy objects on students, broke school property, and caused chaos. Filch tried to contain him, but Dumbledore refused to banish Peeves, despite clearly having the magical power to do so. This wasn't harmless fun, it was institutionalized harassment. A serious headmaster would have created an environment where students felt safe walking the halls at night, not one where they had to dodge water balloons and sabotage. Dumbledore's strategy of permissiveness extended to allowing dangerous creatures on campus. He let Hagrid keep Aragog in a cupboard until the monster grew so large it had to flee to the Forbidden Forest. In Chamber of Secrets, when students were petrified, Dumbledore offered no real reassurance. He spoke in riddles to Harry and left clues to be uncovered through risk and danger, making the solution to the attacks a quest for two 12-year-olds. His methods forced children to shoulder adult responsibilities while he played the distant chess master. He routinely excused the inexcusable. He let Remus Lupin teach at Hogwarts, knowing Remus could become a deadly werewolf. While Lupin was responsible and took precautions, there was no mention of school-wide safety plans or emergency procedures for parents or students. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Snape outed Lupin, it was treated as a personal betrayal instead of a catastrophic failure of student safety policy. Dumbledore trusted individuals he liked, but never established safeguards beyond personal loyalty, leaving children to pay the price for his misplaced faith. He manipulated and tested his favorites cruelly. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were given a time-turner in Prisoner of Azkaban, a wildly dangerous artifact, with minimal adult oversight. He gave them just enough information to act on his behalf, saving Sirius Black while preserving his own hands-clean image. The children were constantly pushed into moral dilemmas. Dumbledore offered them just enough rope to hang themselves if they chose poorly. It's easy to call this teaching them to be brave, but it was also a method of ensuring they performed risky jobs for him. He tolerated inter-house duels and grudges even during wartime, never unifying the school's defenses. In Half-Blood Prince, as attacks escalated and Katie Bell was cursed, he allowed Hogwarts to remain fractious, refusing to share vital details with the staff. He insisted on secrecy even when it put lives at risk. He told Harry about the Horcruxes alone, burdening a teenager with the responsibility of hunting Voldemort's soul. This wasn't teaching, it was grooming a child soldier for a war Dumbledore was too old to fight himself. He saw Hogwarts as a crucible in which students could be hardened, and he let them burn so they'd emerge stronger. Yet this philosophy ignores the damage done to children forced to confront fear, hatred, and trauma without help. Neville Longbottom shaking as he faced Snape, Hermione sobbing after being called a mudblood, Luna Lovegood ostracized for her eccentricity. These were the quiet casualties of Dumbledore's grand plan. He saw the big picture but neglected the small mercies that make a school safe. He was in many ways the archetype of the wise old man who refused to intervene in youthful conflicts. He believed struggle made students resilient, but as Order of the Phoenix reveals, when the school was left to Umbridge's tyranny, students were traumatized, scarred, and brutalized. Dumbledore later admitted he'd abandoned them to keep Harry safe from Voldemort's link, but he never acknowledged the cost paid by hundreds of children forced to fight an adult's war on their own turf. In the end, Hogwarts was his moral experiment, and the students were the test subjects who bled for his strategy.